metal specimen that couldn't be duplicated any way that they know how. So now I've had them over there, and this is my second trip. And we came back from there, and they agreed, although this was not the business of Intercept, and they shouldn't get involved in anything as kooky as this, if we could keep it low level, that they would help me conduct the investigation. By this time, I had been back once to AFRO, and I now knew that the investigation isn't anything anybody's going to conduct in a short time. You can't do it in a few days, and you can't do it in a parlor like was the normal procedure for UFO groups. They go to a case, interview the man in his house over the coffee table, make some notes, and go back and file a report. This was going to take some in-depth work, and it's going to take staying time. It's going to take weeks, maybe months, and several trips and a lot of money. So I was trying to get support for this. I realized there's no UFO club in the country that can afford to conduct the kind of investigation that would be necessary to find out what's really going on with this case and with these beautiful pictures. And once they agreed to do this over the telephone, things began to change. We began to be followed every place we went. Our telephones were tapped. And at first, this was very disturbing because they didn't know why it was being done. Why would, if our government denies the existence of UFOs, why are they tapping our phones and following us around? I was followed so often, I knew which cars were the cars that were doing the following. I could recognize them, and they'd keep at least one car between me and them all over town and wherever we went, any place. So when we were going to have a meeting to discuss something, Lee would call me at home, and he'd say, go to a public telephone and call me back at such and such a number in 5 minutes. If you don't make it in 5 minutes, go back home, wait for another call. I'd go do that, call him from the grocery store in front of the Circle K or whatever I could, and he'd say, meet me at the usual place. By the time I got halfway across town, my green Cadillac, or Lincoln, it was a green Lincoln sedan, would be behind me. It was driven by a man who once ran for county attorney in the city of Tucson. He was always there. He's an elderly man, wore a nice business suit, gray hair, but I couldn't shake the guy. And they had relays too. They could pass it off. So I'm telling Lee, why are they doing this? If there's nothing to this, why is this going on? And so we used to meet at Picacho. It's a landmark between Tucson and Phoenix where we could go up the side of a hill and see everything below us coming from every direction. And we found that later they had even bugged the site where we're meeting. We gave too much away. So now a time came when we're going back for the second trip, and we've talked about it a couple of times on the phone, and then we went to these strange secrecy techniques like kids, trying to get away with something, and we decided that they decided they would join me in the investigation, which now is going to be a deviation from their pattern. And a few days after that, about 10 days after that, Lee got a letter in the mail from the Knights, with the return address on the corner said the Knights Templars of Malta, and it came from London. It was an airmail letter. And inside, on engraved parchment, was a typed letter that said, we believe we have interests in common. Please, and that you may be coming to Europe in the near future, please contact us by telephone. Well, we decided we wouldn't contact them by telephone. We didn't need any help. And what were they talking about? We hadn't a good idea what they were talking about, but we were not going to tell anybody. We're trying to keep the whole thing secret. So we didn't respond. We didn't respond, and 2 weeks later we got another letter in the mail. This time it came on House of Lords stationery, engraved stationery again. Now, the first letter from the Knights Templars of Malta was signed, after the brief little 2-paragraph message, was signed Mark Nathan, Secretary General of the Knights Templars of Malta. So now we reject that. We don't do anything about it. The next one that came on House of Lords stationery, and it's a letter inside the same way. And this one was another invitation says, you didn't respond to our last letter. We still are interested in a communication. Please contact us as soon as you get to London. Now, we hadn't told anybody we were going to London. I hadn't even told my daughters I was going to London. So we decided to ignore that one, too. Now, this letter on the House of Lords stationery was signed again, Mark Nathan, Secretary before the Rod, or something like that it was. It's a strange secretary title that's used in the House of Commons in London. And now he's got our curiosity because it's the same name and the same signature on two different important letterheads. So we decided we would wait until we got out of Switzerland and call him on the way back. We didn't want anybody to know where we were or what we were doing. And these guys, because they were private investigators, always insisted on the greatest secrecy. I mean, they went to great pains to obscure everything that we were doing. And so we bought the cheapest tickets possible on Laker Airlines, it was at the time, and we went to London in tourist class, steerage class in the back, and got off at the London airport and caught the subway. Now, how can anybody follow you on the subway? We caught the subway into town and got off at Victoria Station. Now, there's the subway, runs every 10 minutes. So if anybody's going to be able to pick something out, it's just going to be tough. We got off the subway at Victoria Station and are going to the street to take a taxi cab to an old gunnery sergeant's house where we were going to stay. A friend that we had met before who had a walk-up. He was renting rooms in his walk-up. We weren't even staying in a hotel. And we came out of down the railroad platform heading for the taxi exit, and a big, tall, black cabbie, London cabbie, comes up to us, tapped Lee on the shoulder and says, "You're Mr. Elders?" Lee said, "Yes." He said, "Come with me." We said, we're going to take a taxi. We're tired. We want to go get some sleep. We have reservations. He said, "I have your reservations." So we thought, well, maybe the old gunner sergeant has sent him down there. So we got in his cab, put our bags in there, and he didn't drive us the direction we were going. We wanted to go out of London, and he took us right downtown London, around Hyde Park, and parked in front of the Grosvenor House. The Grosvenor House is a big apartment hotel on Hyde Park, on the side of the Hyde Park, that looks at the American Embassy on one side and the Russian Embassy on the other. And he parked in front, said, "I'll lock the bags in the car, come with me," and he locked everything in there. We went in the lobby. He motioned to somebody, and another man came along. We got on an elevator, took us up to the third floor, and he's not giving us any opportunity to refuse or anything else. Now, there were some bars that could be drawn across at that time. I thought they were fire protection, but they may have been something else. Anyway, we got through, and we got off the elevator on the fifth floor, walked down to room number, I think it was 520 on the left-hand side. He knocked on the door, opened it. There was a man with spectacles and business suit behind the door. He said something to him, then motioned us in. It was a kind of a wet bar. There was a refrigerator. There was a little hot plate on one side. There was a sink, things like that, and another door on the other side of this little entryway. He went to that and opened it up and ushered us into a big sitting room. It was about, for London, it was immense. It was about 20 feet one direction by 10 or 12 the other direction. And in that room was a large overstuffed sofa, four seats, four-cushion one, a big one, and a big, heavy coffee table. And then on the other side, to the left of it, was a shorter love seat type, two-cushion sofa. And over in the corner over here was a big black overstuffed chair with the big black fat arms on a little table on each side, on each arm. And on that side, facing the big lounge, the big sofa, were the picture windows, full wall of picture windows that looked out on Hyde Park. And we were introduced to Mark Nathan. And he's standing in front of this big, fat, black, overstuffed chair, and he smiles and he motions us to sit down, So I sat down on the big sofa. Lee and Britt were near the small one. They sat down on the two-cushion sofa. And he sat down, and I started to pull my pants up over my knees like that so it wouldn't be uncomfortable. And about that time, the white telephone on his right-hand side rang 10 short rings. Now, immediately, we knew what that was because we had been in Meier's house at a time when the Pleiadians would ring his telephone 10 short rings to let him know that what he was thinking was them and not his own thoughts. Early on, he wasn't clearly able to distinguish between telepathic transmissions and his own thoughts. And then, in that case, they would signal him 10 short rings on his telephone. Now, no telephone in the world can ring 10 short rings because there's only 6 lobes on the cam. You can get any combination of 6, you can't get 10. And we took his telephone apart to be sure of this. I mean, he had the same kind of a phone. It's a bunch of rotary cams, and it can't be rung short. You can't get 10 rings of any kind. So and we'd heard this in Meier's house. So here we're sitting in front of this Mark Nathan, who we don't know who he is at the time. And his phone rings, 10 short rings, and he said, he tried to answer it, and there was nobody on the line. And he said, hello, hello, and he tried, and he said, well, that's strange, he said. And I looked at Lee, and Lee and Britt looked at me, and we know what it is. We say, have you ever heard a ring like that before? He said, that was kind of strange, wasn't it? Lee said, do you think it rung 10 times? And he said, well, maybe. And he said, I'll find out. And he picked up his phone, and he called down to the desk. He said, who rang? They said, no calls to your room. He said, could anybody call this room from any place else in the hotel? And they said, not going through the switchboard. There's been no calls to your room. And there were some more questions, and he put it down and shook his head and started to talk, and the red phone on the other side rang 10 short rings. So he says, I'll find out about this. And he picked it up and said, hello. There's nobody on there. And he says, this is a secure phone. It's monitored 24 hours a day. Nobody can dial in here that doesn't have a certain security clearance. He says, I'll find out about this. And he asked that operator, and he said, no, you haven't had any calls. No lights on the board. Nobody's called you. And he put it back up. And then he introduced himself, and he said his name was Mark Nathan, that he was the case officer for the London District. That's CIA case officer for the London District. That means he's in charge of the whole London District, and we're sitting in his office, and he's Mark Nathan, and he signed these two fake documents, the letter from the Knights Templars of Malta and the letter from the House of Commons in London. And then he proceeds to tell us that they're interested in what we're doing, that they haven't been able to get a man inside, and they wondered if we would talk to him on the way out. So we said, sure, we'll talk to you. And he wished us well and sent us on our way. They told us what they knew about the case, and we probably talked to him no more than 10 minutes, and he sent us downstairs. He sent us to our residence in a big limousine, which probably surprised all the neighbors because the gunnery sergeant lived in a very poor neighborhood of London. And then, after that, every time we went in and out, we were picked up by the CIA, taken to his office, and we were either asked what we were going to do going in, or we were asked what we did when we came out. And if we were carrying pictures or anything, they asked to see them, and when we handed them to them, they'd take them out, and they'd bring them back 15 or 20 minutes later. We'd talk about various things, and we finally had been to his office so many times we were getting to be on a first-name basis. We called him Mark, and he called us by first names. About the fourth time we came out, he said, look, he said, my wife would like to fix you dinner tonight. Can you come by for dinner? So we said, sure. He said, I'll send the limo to pick you up. We're staying at the gunnery sergeant's place again. He said, I'll send the limo to pick you up about 5 o'clock. That'd be okay? And we said, sure, that's fine with us. So the limo arrived, and we got in it, and we went to his house, and he introduced us to his wife. His wife was an ethnic Chinese lady who was a Chinese intelligence agent. Sun Chi Li, are you here? She was a Chinese intelligence agent before Mark Nathan met her. Mark Nathan was an American intelligence agent, and we came to the conclusion that it was a marriage of convenience. It gave us a channel into their operations and gave them a channel into ours. Why this had to be the Chinese, I don't know. But she was very gracious. She fixed a wonderful Chinese dinner. We had a nice dinner that was very sociable. We talked about ordinary things. And afterwards, they invited us into their living room to have tea. And we sat down on the sofa and the chairs there, and things were proceeding very friendly when Mark Nathan got up and he said, you know, I got something you'll be interested in. And he went to the table at the end of the sofa I was sitting on. It was a round end table with a lamp on it and some flowers. And he went to the end of the table at the end. He took the flowers off, set it on the floor, took the lamp off and set it on the floor, and picked up the table, and it was a shell. And under the shell was a safe. He knelt down. He says, don't look at me while I turn. Of course, he had his back between us and the numbers. And he twirled the dial, and he opened the safe, swung the door open, and he says, come here. And we went over there, and he first took out a package of passports and laid them on the floor. There was about 8 or 9 passports tied together with a rubber band. And Lee says, are all those yours? He said, yeah, I travel a lot. So Lee says, well, what countries are they? And he handed them to him. Lee took the rubber band off. There was India. He had a passport from India with his picture and signature, passport from Canada with his picture and signature, passport from a Scandinavian country, an American passport, a diplomatic passport, a security passport from, he had 8 of them, and his name and signature in them all. And Lee says, well, you must do a lot of traveling. He said, I really need them once in a while. And but he was setting things out, and he got down to a paper bag, a grocery bag, about that size. And he took it out, and he said, this is what I'm looking for. And in the course of getting to the bag, he moved 8.5 by 11 mimeograph booklet that was about 3/4 of an inch thick, had a blue cover, had a red stripe down from the upper right-hand corner to the lower left-hand corner. He took it out and laid it on the floor, and then he put some other things on it, and he handed the bag to Lee, and what was in the bag was miniature pickups. There were pickups in there so small that you could take the eraser out of a lead pencil, put the pickup under the eraser, push it back in place. There was a little wire that stuck up along the side. He said, this can transmit as much as 500 feet. But he had things that you could put them in a lot of other things, too. And Lee said, boy, that is remarkable. Technology says this is the latest state of the art. So then he showed us a couple other things he showed that he had in there. And then he started putting everything back in, and he put the blue book with the red tape on it in there, and he put the passports on the top and closed the door and twirled the dial and put the shell back over again and plants back on and the lamp. And we went on talking. And he drove us home in his limousine that night. We walked up our walk up 4 floors to the bedroom, and it was near midnight, and we were tired. And I walked in Lee's room with him and Britton, and he started undressing. He took his keys out of his pocket and laid them up on a wardrobe, a standalone wardrobe like that that you put clothes in. And then he dumped all the change in his pocket up there. And he laid some other things down. He started taking his shoes off, and I said, well, I think I'll go to bed. And Britt said, well, we'll see you in the morning. And I heard him lock the door behind me. I went across the hall to my own room. It was right across from their door. The next morning, I get up early. The next morning, I was up about 5 o'clock, and I thought, before I left, I said, hey, I'm going to go down for early breakfast. You know, if we wait too long, there's not much left. So if you want me to wake you up, fine. And Lee said, yeah, get me up. We'll go for a walk. So I get up about 5 o'clock, and I went across the hall and knocked on the door, and I heard a sleepy voice, and he come and unlocked it, and the hair's all over his head, and he's standing there in his shorts. And he said, oh, come on in. I'll get ready, get dressed. So we went in, and I sat down in a little chair beside the sink there, and he went over and got his shirt and put it on, pulled his pants on, and then reached over to get his change and his keys off the wardrobe, and they're not on the metal that he laid them on the night before. They're on top of a 8.5 by 11 blue book, about 3/4 of an inch thick, with a blue cover and a red tape running from the upper right hand to the lower left hand corner across it. And he looks at it and he says, Jesus Christ, you ever seen this before? And I said, yeah, it was in that safe we looked at last night. He said, yeah. He says, what did it say? We looked at the cover, same thing. He says, oh, we got to call Mark and let him know what happened. Now, we woke Britt up and says, how did this get here? And she says, I don't know. I didn't bring anything back last night. Do you bring anything back? No, we didn't bring anything back. And we're puzzling about this. He said, well, we got to let him know. So we went down to the phone at the landing in the stairs in the hallway, called Mark Nathan, got him out of bed, told him, we've got your blue book. He said, oh, no, you haven't. He said, it's in the safe. But he said, well, you better look and see if it's still there, because we got one just like it in the room. So he said, just a minute, I'll take a look. And he came back about less than 5 minutes later, all out of breath, and he says, where did you get it? You haven't looked at it, have you? We said, no, we haven't looked at it. We're not concerned about it. He said, don't look. I promise you won't look at it. I'll be right there. And he whistled up in about 12 minutes in his limousine, ran all the way up the stairs, came to the door out of breath, and he says, where is it? And we said, we haven't touched it. It's right there on the right where we found it this morning. He picked it up and looked at it. He said, Jesus Christ. He says, how did you get it out of the safe? We thought, we don't know. And that was an example of what I call interference that was perpetrated by somebody. That was one example. There were lots of examples. This is what makes this case so credible. You don't have to ask me whether I believe it or not. I try not to assert that it's real, because there's a lot of things I don't like to assert. But there are things like this all through the case that make it highly credible to me. The ringing of the telephones, the things coming out of locked safes. We were coming out of there one time with some pictures, 300 pictures that I had bought from Mr. He always insisted on giving them to me, and I didn't want them free, and I'd pay him for the cost of reproducing them. And we're coming out with those. And when we got to the railroad station and got on the train, now we didn't have tickets or passports or anything. I mean, we had passports. We didn't have advanced reservations or anything. We got on a train and rode to the French border. And when you change trains in Switzerland when you go into France, by the time we got to the French border and changed trains and got on a car, there was nobody else on the car. There was a French officer sitting on one end, a police officer, and we got on the car, and we thought he was just monitoring traffic coming in. When the train pulled out, nobody else got on the car. We walked down to the other end. There's another police officer sitting on the other end of the car. And we asked him if there's anything about the car, and he, And we rode all the way across France, just 3 people in that whole darn train car with a French officer on each end all the way to the port where we got off to go take the boat train across. Why that was, I'll never know. I've never been on a European train with nobody else on the car but me. And the only thing that was different is we had 300 pictures with us. And the officers never said anything. I don't think they even knew why they were there. And maybe they weren't there for that reason, but it was really peculiar. Another time when we were carrying pictures, we got off in a crowd of people, and you know, Michael, when you get off and you get in a crowd, you get in a long line to go through customs, right? So we got a lot of always carried a lot of stuff. So it takes us longer to get there, and the whole line is ahead of us. And we're way back down the line and thinking we'll never get a seat on the ferry boat because we're too far back. All the seats will be gone. Well, we're standing there talking. Lee gets tapped on the shoulder. It's a French customs officer. Tapped him on the shoulder and says, motion for us to come with him. And we went past all the people in the line. He opened another station to the left that was unmanned. Motioned for us through, checked the passport, stamped them, motioned us on. We got through, and he closed the station and went and left. Now, why that happened, I'll never know. When we got down on the starting platform, we were supposed to catch a certain train and car, we thought, and we asked there's a policeman there, and where it was, should have been on this track, and just on that track over there, number 14. So we said, but it's over here. No, on that track over there. But there's our train over there. So we followed him and we went over there, and the train pulled out. And we got to our destination okay, but we were on a different train entirely. Well, that time we had some intelligence agents following us that somebody didn't want following us, and they got on the right train, and we're on the wrong train. And the intelligence agents that thought they were on a car we were on got into a fight on a railroad platform in Amsterdam, were arrested and thrown in jail. And when we got to London and we're taking to Mark Nathan's office, he says, what the hell do you do? Who ever taught you to sanitize a trail like that? We said, what do you mean sanitize a trail? He says, how do you give my men the slip? They're the best in the business. We said, we didn't know we gave anybody the slip. He said, 2 men over in jail over there. He had to send 2 more men to get them out, take them more passports and get them out. Now, why that kind of interference? I mean, why is that happening over a case that is ridiculous? It's a UFO case. The government says they don't exist. And somebody's spending an awful lot of money. They're spending as much money to follow us as we're spending to get there. And this just went on and on all the way through the case. How long have we been going here? Oh, my God. You want a break? You want to stand up?